The 6th of July, 1819, Paris. A warm, overcast summer evening in the Jardin de Tivoli.
Which were pleasure gardens. It was sort of an outdoor venue for the big entertainments of the time. It was all about spectacle. There were thousands and thousands of people there just to see this extraordinary show.
Sophie Blanchard appeared in a white dress, hat and feathers. She climbed into the doll-sized gondola basket of a silk hot air balloon. The basket was garlanded with fireworks.
The idea was that she would go up into the night sky and light fireworks, and these would rain down through the sky. It would be a fabulous spectacle.
Madame Blanchard secured herself into position with ropes.
Press reports said she had bird-like features, and yet she was small, but she was a tough cookie.
Darkness fell. At 10:30, a cannon fired. Its sound echoed across the gardens. Lead pipes channeled gas into the balloon. The music from the orchestra swelled. Madame Blanchard waved to the crowd.
She knew what she was doing. This was her 67th ascent. It's not like she was a novice. And she went up into the air. Music filled the Paris night. Everyone was agog to see the show.
The Parisian crowd applauded. But as Madame Blanchard's balloon rose slowly into the night sky, she felt wind whip past her. Suddenly, a gust crashed her into some trees.
She had to throw ballast overboard to clear the branches.
She continued to ascend.
But what she didn't know is that bump had dislodged the pyrotechnics that were hanging beneath the gondola.
For BBC Radio 4, this is History's Heroes. People with purpose, brave ideas, and the courage to stand alone. I'm Alex von Tunzelmann. I'm a historian, and today's episode is about Sophie Blanchard, a French aeronaut and pioneer of hot air ballooning who broke gender and social barriers. She made an indelible mark on the history of aviation.
When I was a journalist, I met someone who was covering the story of the Army parachute team, and it just, I just thought it might sound fun, when you're young and silly, and it was fun, and so I had a lot of fun skydiving.
Sally Smith founded the world's first ever all-girl parachute display team.
But then I got married, had kids. I wanted to be in the air because being in the air is fantastic. But I wasn't happy skydiving with little kiddies on the ground. And we were lucky enough then to get a sponsored hot air balloon. And that was the ideal way to still mess about in the sky. But of course, kids could sit in the retrieve van and follow this big balloon in the sky.
In the skies, she found purpose and peace.
It can get dangerous and it can get a bit strenuous. I had to land in a football field near Bristol because it's so built up. But generally, if you take off, you're very conscious of the weather. You take off calmly and you can sort of float about. And you can brush through tops of trees and you can dip down in smaller baskets in water and land very, very gently. And so in some ways, it's a very peaceful occupation. But of course, you do have to be alert because things can go wrong quite quickly.
Now, Sally writes books about remarkable female aviators and aeronauts, such as Sophie Blanchard. August 1805, a field in Toulouse. The inventor Jean-Pierre Blanchard unpacked a huge hydrogen balloon. Napoleon Bonaparte had recently been crowned the first emperor of France. For many people, it was a time of chaos.
Napoleon was stomping around Europe. There was war and aggression on the ground.
Jean-Pierre's wife, Sophie, watched as he checked the gas valve.
Sophie knew that she had to be on her mettle all the time. She knew that one moment's lapse and it could all end very badly.
Sharon Wright is an author and historian. Madame Blanchard watched her husband check the silk balloon for any rips or tears.
Sophie had a balloonist build. Small people had the advantage because they were lighter to carry.
She'd been born Marie-Madeleine Sophie Armand in 1778. Her family was from a village near La Rochelle. She was a simple country girl.
She was well under 5 foot. She wasn't a great talker, and there were reports that she was, it sounds awful now, but very ugly.
At that time, the French monarchy was still going strong. Daily life was hard for Sophie's family, with high taxes and a series of bad harvests. But in 1783, when Sophie was 5, something happened that would eventually change her life. 2 brothers, Joseph Michel Montgolfier and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier, demonstrated the first balloon flight. The brothers used fire to heat air inside large, lightweight paper envelopes. The heat made the air inside less dense. That caused the balloons to rise. Their first demonstration was at the Palace of Versailles, in front of the king and a crowd of dignitaries. The first passengers were a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. To the wonder of the crowd, the balloon took off and 8 minutes later landed safely. The animals were all fine. 2 months later, the brothers were permitted to demonstrate the first untethered flight. 2 men flew in a balloon from the Bois de Boulogne.
Everyone was just jumping up and down. They really could get up in the air.
And that triggered balloonomania, balloon fever, balloon influenza. It had all these names because it was an absolute sensation.
Women sometimes had dresses designed to look like a balloon. Little tea caddies were made with the pictures of ballooning on. They had ballooning hats with a basket that sat on your head and then a carefully shaped balloon above it.
But also balloons were stitched into furnishings, they were on curtains. Balloons were the thing to have if you were on trend in the late Georgian era in Europe.
Early ballooning developed quickly. Soon, as well as hot air balloons, there were hydrogen balloons.
They were very, very effective at rising, but they were called, by the inventor, inflammable air. So the clue is in the title, isn't it?
Jean-Pierre Blanchard had a hydrogen balloon. In 1785, he made news around the world when he made the first aerial crossing of the English Channel. He flew from Dover Castle to Guînes with an American physician, Dr. John Jeffreys, who funded the expedition. These balloonings started a craze for science and flight throughout society. Outside cities, though, it was less likely that people had heard about the new technology. Making a landing in the countryside could be risky.
You get often agricultural workers coming up and wanting to stab the balloon with pitchforks because they thought it was a monster from space.
Some in the church worried about the theological implications of taking to the skies.
Going into the airy realm, which was God's territory, and you might pay a price for that.
By the time Sophie Armand was a young woman, France had changed beyond recognition. The monarchy had been overthrown. The country had become a republic. Now, with the crowning of Napoleon, it was an empire. The French Republic initially adopted broad principles of liberty, equality and natural rights, defined by the Marquis de Lafayette and Abbé Sieyès in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. But women were not considered citizens. When Napoleon became emperor, he reduced women's legal and marital rights too. Sophie worried she might be a burden to her parents forever.
All the girls she knew were getting married, and there she was, no boyfriend. Women weren't allowed to own property, they couldn't get mortgages, they couldn't run their own lives at all.
She went to La Rochelle to watch a balloon show. Since his flight over the Channel, Jean-Pierre Blanchard had become a celebrity. Like most balloonists of the time, he funded his flights by selling tickets for public displays. He performed all over Europe and even in the United States, flying from Philadelphia to New Jersey along the Delaware River. That flight was watched by luminaries, including President George Washington.
He was very famous across Europe and America, but he wasn't a very good businessman. He was good at making money, but he was not good at hanging on to it.
Blanchard wasn't getting any younger, and he was nearly bankrupt. He was always looking for new gimmicks to improve his shows. He already knew that a crowd would turn out to see girls fly.
He first took a 14-year-old up and then a 13-year-old up for short flights.
Now he was looking for an adult woman to act as his assistant. Jean-Pierre Blanchard was already married, but he'd abandoned his wife and 4 children to pursue ballooning. His first wife later died in poverty. It's not clear if Sophie knew any of this, but her relationship with Blanchard brought her into a world she could hardly have imagined.
Suddenly she had some control in her life.
The date and legitimacy of their marriage is disputed, but they were performing together by the end of 1804. In front of a crowd in Marseille, Monsieur Blanchard took Madame Blanchard on her first balloon flight. She might not have seemed like the kind of person who'd become an adventurous showwoman.
She didn't like crowds, she didn't like noise. If a horse and cart went by, she would start.
But as they rose into the air, Madame Blanchard was overcome.
She said it was an incomparable sensation.
In the air, there was peace.
We can now think about her suffering from a sort of sensory overload when she was on the ground in ordinary life, and this absolute revelation, almost magical, that when she was in the sky, all that jarring, anxiety-inducing noise was gone.
The crowds loved her. Monsieur Blanchard was thrilled. But next time, he'd push her a step further. A few months later, in Toulouse, they approached the balloon.
The balloon was standing up and there was a little basket below.
Madame Blanchard stepped confidently into the basket. She loosened the tethered ropes and took off, alone.
She wasn't frightened, she didn't panic, she just calmly did that flight and landed.
Women balloonists had ascended before, but Sophie Blanchard became the first woman in the world to pilot her own balloon. Over the next couple of years, Madame Blanchard ballooned both solo and with her husband.
And she proved a very, very good companion for him.
She loved her new life.
They were in a lot of debt, but they were getting the bookings.
But their performances could be dangerous.
People would be drinking. They'd be sat waiting for the balloon show, and the longer they had to wait, the drunker they got. And if it didn't go as planned, they'd just riot.
Then, of course, there were the balloon flights themselves. Flying over Rotterdam in 1807, the Blanchards crashed. They both survived, but Jean-Pierre suffered a serious head injury. Sophie was physically unhurt, but for a while afterwards she could not speak owing to the shock. The following year, they flew in The Hague. During the flight, though, something happened to Jean-Pierre.
The reports say he probably had a heart attack.
Like most balloon baskets of the time, theirs was low-sided.
He fell forward out the balloon and plunged to the ground.
Jean-Pierre survived again, but his injuries were serious. Nearly a year later, Sophie was still nursing him.
He knew they were flat broke and in debt.
In March 1809, just before he took his dying breath, Jean-Pierre Blanchard suggested to his wife that she faced a bleak choice.
He said, you can drown yourself or you can hang yourself because there's no money.
Sophie Blanchard was now a widow, but still only in her early 30s.
Suddenly she was on her own. She didn't have a man telling her what to do.
It wasn't clear which wife would inherit Jean-Pierre Blanchard's debt.
She felt the debt was hers, and she was very honourable. She'd lived with this man anyway.
Madame Blanchard couldn't go back to her old life. Instead, she performed a solo flight above Paris.
Her main aim was just to survive.
This was the trade she'd learned, and it was competitive.
It's hard to sustain your reputation when there are newcomers in the field.
So she had to do more with her act.
She started thinking about how can I improve it.
She exchanged her balloon for a smaller model. This would make manoeuvring and steering easier, and as she was herself of short stature, she was perfectly sized to pilot it. She also cut her costs.
She swapped a hot air burner for hydrogen.
Finally, she created a signature show costume.
She wore a white Empire line dress, which was gathered under the bust and then fell to the floor, her little silver slippers, and she wore plumes of feathers in her hair.
This was not only stylish, the white dress made her more visible from the ground.
Her tiny frame and those snowy outfits made her look like a dove.
June 1810, the Champ de Mars, Paris. The Emperor Napoleon had just married his second wife, Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria. He invited Madame Blanchard to fly at the celebrations. Balloons were taking off in an ascent, but Madame Blanchard stood out. Napoleon caught sight of her. He was enthralled.
She was a beautiful little angel, and that's the image that she played on very successfully. And Napoleon thought it was wonderful, and he decided almost to become her patron.
With regular money coming in, Madame Blanchard started to repay the immense debt.
And she had a beautiful silver basket, metal silver, made for her, highly decorated, that looked amazing and fitted in with the scene of an angel going up into the sky.
This silver gondola curved up at the sides like a child's cradle.
She used a flimsy silver gondola to stand on, because that took much less expensive gas to raise.
Though there were other women aeronauts, they were still a rarity. And here was Madame Blanchard creating a strikingly feminine show.
There were rumours that women shouldn't be flying anyway because it could affect their delicate organs.
She was a runaway success.
Everyone loved her. Her shows were the hottest tickets in town, full stop. Her image hanging above the streets of Paris or any of the other major cities was captured many times on canvas by the artists of the day.
In the past, people had sometimes been cruel about her appearance. But now, the press called her beautiful.
She made the papers all the time and people were absolutely agog for her adventures.
She maintained an air of mystery.
She didn't really give interviews. She wasn't a woman who made her way out to the public after an event. And she was looked up to so much by so many women who were trapped in their homes thinking, oh my goodness, look at what she's doing. And she became a definite hero to many French women right across the country.
What she gave to people was that sense of wonder, the sense of joy that comes when you're just being hugely entertained. It doesn't have to be cerebral, it's very sort of visceral, really.
And she enjoyed the celebrity. Suddenly she was someone that people listened to and respected, a complete reversal from her childhood. And she loved it. And I think after that, she became determined to keep that status.
Now she was a balloonist for the Emperor. She performed at state events.
She was asked to ascend over every important occasion, including Napoleon's birthday, his second wedding, his son's baptism.
She loved this applause. She loved being recognised. She loved people coming up to her and helping her.
Everything she did made the news, and usually it was approving, even when she had an accident.
Sophie was self-assured.
I think she was very polite to men who were always telling her what to do. But then quietly, off she went and did what she felt was right.
Ballooning could still be very dangerous. In 1811, near Vincennes, Madame Blanchard was forced to take her balloon to a high altitude.
A hailstorm forced her to just stay in the air for 14 hours. You know, the reports say she was fighting whirlwinds, she was having fainting fits.
The same year, she made several flights over Rome. On one ascent, she climbed higher than was safe.
Her breathing was becoming heavier because, she went up to 12,000 feet, which is on the edge of really survival with oxygen.
On a flight from Milan, exhaustion got the better of her.
There's one report, she said she'd fallen asleep.
And on a flight from Turin, the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on her hands and face.
The balloon luckily descended before too much damage was done.
The Emperor Napoleon appointed Madame Blanchard to the position of aeronaut of the official festivals. This meant she was responsible for organising all Parisian balloon displays.
Napoleon might have been using her to bolster his image, but the people on the ground weren't. They were just going to a fabulous show that they'd talk about for the rest of their lives.
But Napoleon's empire was in trouble. In 1814, a coalition of Prussia, Austria and Russia defeated him at Leipzig, invaded France and captured Paris. He was forced to abdicate and exiled to Elba. The coalition restored the Bourbon monarchy. The new king was Louis XVIII. Madame Blanchard flew in her balloon from the Pont Neuf with fireworks in celebration. It was announced she was now the official aeronaut of the Restoration.
That ability to float above that political turmoil of her age. Everybody loved Sophie, and Sophie loved anyone who was paying the bill by the look of it.
September 1817, Nantes, France. Sophie Blanchard was now 39 years old. She took her 53rd balloon flight.
And she saw a lovely flat area and she thought, oh, this is going to be another gentle landing. And she just stood there happily.
But when the basket hit the ground, she realised it wasn't solid.
She'd landed in a really marshy, very wet, marshy field.
The balloon began to sink, and with it, Madame Blanchard.
And the water was being forced into her mouth. She'd been caught in the rigging, which often happened of the balloon. And instead of just getting it out, she couldn't get out of it. She was being forced into the water, and the balloon was still moving along slowly with the air.
Everything became a blur.
But luckily, some people had rushed up, seen what had happened, hauled her out.
She survived.
This was the first time she'd realised that actually things can go wrong for her. There'd been balloon crashes all over the place, which she'd have been aware of, but somehow she felt she was above them, or she was different.
Nearly 2 years later, the evening of the 6th of July, 1819, Jardin de Tivoli, Paris. Madame Blanchard watched the people milling about the pleasure garden's fete. She was preparing to perform one of her night flight firework displays, known as Bengal lights.
She could imagine how delighted everybody would be when they saw little silver sparks and stars falling to the earth.
Friends had warned her that balloon silk, hydrogen, gunpowder and matches might be a recipe for disaster. But Madame Blanchard knew that the spectacle of fireworks exploding from a balloon was a sight for audiences to behold.
She'd take off in the darkness and people would see this woman highlighted in a little bit white dress with fireworks below her ascending into the sky.
That night, the weather was blustery.
She said she had a feeling about that evening.
But still she prepared herself for her 10:30 ascent. From the moment she left the ground, it was a challenge to steady the balloon against the winds. At a height of 120 metres, she lit a match.
She started lighting the fireworks to make it look absolutely beautiful. And as she lit one, the sparks went.
Suddenly there was a series of pops and a blinding flash, and incredibly, the whole of the balloon was engulfed in flames.
She could still see the delight on the faces of the audience below. They thought it was all part of the show. Historians aren't sure what caused the fire. It's possible Madame Blanchard hadn't properly closed the gas vent, or a spark from a firework could have caught the silk of the balloon. Hidden by a cloud, Madame Blanchard would have heard shouts of joy.
Beautiful, beautiful, viva Madame Blanchard. They didn't know that she was fighting for her life.
She started throwing out any weight she had in that little basket.
Finally, the gas expired. The balloon began to plummet. That was when the audience realised something was seriously wrong.
There were, according to the press, cries of lamentation. Females fell into convulsions. The gendarme set off at full gallop to where they thought she was going to land.
Sophie tried to steer her balloon. She began to cry out. Above the Rue de Provence, she pitched out. She landed on the roof of number 16. She caught the parapet above the street, but the roof gave way. Madame Blanchard couldn't stop her fall. Tangled in ropes, she plunged to the street below. A rescue team arrived.
And then they put her on an armchair and they carried her back to Tivoli. And there the doctors and everybody tried to revive her.
It was too late. Sophie Blanchard was dead.
And all that was left was her little bonnet hanging on one bit of wood and her little slipper near it.
It was reported that she'd escaped the flames. Her white dress was completely unmarked. The organisers closed the fete, Quickly, they arranged a collection at the gate as the audience left to raise funds for Madame Blanchard's children. News of the disaster spread fast.
She was famous everywhere. She made headlines all over France, of course. Britain, they practically stopped the press to get the news out. America, across Europe. It was sensational.
The collection for her children was well meant, but soon the organisers learned that in fact Madame Blanchard had no children. And unlike her late husband, she'd managed her business well, leaving a substantial fortune to a friend's daughter. Instead, the money was used to put up a memorial to her in Paris's famous Père Lachaise cemetery. It features a balloon in flames.
It's quite gothic and morbid, isn't it?
Some blamed Madame Blanchard for her own death.
Well, women shouldn't have been in the air. What did you expect? This just shows women shouldn't be in there. What a disaster.
France's first great wave of balloonomania was over. But that didn't stop Sophie Blanchard's story from inspiring writers, including Jules Verne, Charles Dickens, and Fyodor Dostoevsky, and generations of aeronauts.
Sophie was never a woman who went out to save others, but she was a woman who was determined to save herself. And for that alone, I think she's a hero, because she didn't just succumb to the time.
We go to the circus and we watch people on the high wire. They might fall off. We go to watch a Formula One race. They might crash. When you went to see a balloon ascent, you hoped it would go well, but there's always that chance it wouldn't go well. And that gave it jeopardy, that made it a thrill, that made it an exciting thing to watch. And it was all born from her courage.